Hello, everyone. Hello, Manager to Lead Shifters. It is great to have you all joining us again this month for our spotlight on an expert call. And first, before we get underway, I would like to take a moment to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all gathering. I'm on Wonnarua and Darkinjung land, and I believe our guest, Nathaniel, are you on Darug country? Would you be on?
Yes, the biomedical people. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we pay our respects. Very privileged to live, work, play, and walk on this amazing country and in this amazing land. So thank you to everyone for joining us. We're in for a treat. This is a great call this month, and I know lots of you watch the recordings later. Remember, in our group, you're always welcome to ask questions, share those sorts of things. And I will, where we post the videos in the curriculum, I'll make sure that there is a link to our guest, Nathaniel, to his LinkedIn, if ever you want to reach out and ask him any other questions or connect with him and find out more about what he does. So our guest is someone who I guess you could call, we were just discussing, a leadership advisor. And it's someone that I guess our paths keep crossing in and out, don't they, because of our leadership interest. Nathaniel is also a bit of an entrepreneur. We hear a lot about entrepreneurs, but not as much about entrepreneurs. And we might even dive into that a bit as well, because I know that a lot of you are career leaders who don't necessarily have your own practice or business, but are working inside other people's companies or in the government. And so it's, how do you become a leader? How do you grow your entrepreneurship skills? How do you help your teams thrive and survive within a bigger context or within the framework of the organizations that you work in? So, Nathaniel, before we kind of dive into discussing all things leadership, I'd love to know a little bit about your journey. If you could share with people, where did you start in your career? Like, what was your first role? And how did you kind of twist and move to where you are now?
Yeah, okay. So my first role, I studied at the University of Queensland in the late 80s, early 90s. And I thought it was originally set for a career in music education, but the doors didn't open down that path, and I ended up actually working as a missionary for 3.5 years. Working with university students in leadership development. So that was where I really first cut my teeth in terms of the whole leadership development, mentoring, coaching, training piece.
Wow.
Yeah, so from there, moved out of that in the mid-90s, and that coincided with a relocation to Newcastle. And I've had meandering is one way of putting it. I mean, I talk about this in a podcast interview I did a while back, when Marcus Buckingham talks about career. A career, the definition for career is not just a work pathway, but it also means to flail about aimlessly. And certainly in the mid-90s, coming out of a missionary organisation, having not finished formal university qualifications, I certainly went through some evolutions. I ended up working with a consulting group who specialised in corporate superannuation as well as enterprise bargaining, and this was in the mid-90s, in the early days of the Accord, when enterprise bargaining was a relatively new thing. So moved from there to financial advisory, then and was in the financial services space for 3 and a bit years, then formed a partnership with a good friend of mine doing strategic marketing consulting, which went for 5 years. And we were based in Newcastle, but increasingly doing work down in Sydney. So I then, when we wound that up, I moved into working with a global coaching, training and consulting organisation in productivity and workload management. And worked with them in sales, into key account management and strategic account direction, working on very large complex organisations with change programs, to drive culture change around workload management. From there, got headhunted to work for an organisation and a global manufacturing company, and had no experience in that space, but understood the customer. So I went on this huge learning curve. And that was what I really consider my first major career transition from one full-time role to another full-time role. Where I first embraced the work of Michael Watkins around the first 90 days to master career transition stuff. So I was with them for 3 years, developing a whole go-to-market strategy. Then after that, went out and consulted for myself for a few years. Had a period where I was actually quite unwell, so I didn't work for a couple of years. And then coming back into the workforce for the last 7.5 years, I've been at Western Sydney University, working to educate, equip, and empower academics to engage with the world outside the university.
Fantastic. What a purpose to have today in your role, and we'll get to there. But how interesting your career path. I guess when you look back along your journey, you can see threads of similarity, but in lots of different industries and in lots of forms. In the beginning, did you ever have a career plan, or did you, like you were saying, kind of just allow it to evolve?
Look, I mean, I think if you'd talked to me when I was in middle high school, I think I was fairly clear that I wanted to do something in music education.
Yeah.
And that was certainly the tertiary path I went down. Yeah, but it was just the way life circumstances happened, the doors closed. So I went on this, Buckingham talks about a career being a scavenger hunt. So I kind of went on this scavenger hunt of looking for a job that I could bring myself to and give myself to and have a sense of conviction around, and grow my skills. So it was, yeah, the through line, I guess, is as I've looked back and reflected, has been very much about growing into an understanding of who I am as a unique individual and how I'm hardwired, and how I bring that to the role that I'm in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So you've mentioned Marcus Buckingham a couple of times, and aside from being a very charismatic man, he's also very clever. And I love a lot of his work myself, and have found myself a bit like Seneca, where you know, go all in with all of it for a while and then I'll drift away from it. But Marcus Buckingham is one of those people that always keeps coming up. And particularly, I think, because I look a lot at the differences in culture and whether people are moved towards, move away, whether they're in love or fear kind of energies as far as teams go. And I have a culture spectrum that I work on with lots of organizations looking at behaviors. And I know Marcus talks a lot about loving your work and the percentage of time you need to love it to really be in it. What's been your relationship with his work? Because it sounds like it's something that's really added value to your own career and what you advise.
Yep, sure. So I didn't realise it was Marcus Buckingham at the time, but I first encountered his work back in 2006 when I was working for the global coaching, training, and consulting organisation called Priority Management. We had a training manager who was keen to run development workshops for us, and he just one day said, "Oh, I want everyone to have a copy of this little book," which is a red book called StrengthsFinder 2.0, which some people may be familiar with, and said, "There's an assessment code in here. Go take this assessment and print off the report and bring it to this workshop." And I'd been an assessment junkie since the early 90s. When I went through my year of training and development, my first year of missionary training, we did a lot of diagnostic assessment tools for self-knowledge and awareness. So we did, some people would know, the DISC profile and MBTI and role preference indicator and all of those. So I was always very hungry to to get those kind of data points.
Mhm.
And when I got my Clifton Strengths Finder report, uh, it was a lot of lights went on in a way that they hadn't before. And because it was naming things about me, and it was clear the report wasn't just a cookie cutter saying, "Oh, you're an ENTJ like a Myers-Briggs, which means this."
Yeah.
Uh, it was written as though it was around me, and it gave me a language and helped me understand why, although I wasn't somebody who you'd think was a conventional sales person, I was actually being quite successful in the role that I was in.
Mhm.
Uh, and what I didn't realize was that Marcus Buckingham was one of the co-creators of Clifton Strengths Finder. I didn't discover that until I read Love and Work, and he opened up about his story and his journey with the Gallup organization. So uh, he's one of the founders of the Global Strengths movement, uh, and after leaving Gallup, founded his own company and created another strengths assessment. And uh, so I just found his work really has been highly influential in helping me understand the truth about me,
Yeah.
and how to actually be on that conscious journey of growth and development through the work that you do. Yeah.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? I know I do quite a bit with the Gallup strengths as well. And they are, I mean, the statistics are that it's pretty well unique. It's quite rare to find someone who has the same strengths, and obviously always not in the same order. And I think they actually have a strengths twin
Mm.
website now where you can enter in what yours is and see if you have a twin. And I have a twin, I think it's in Denver in Colorado, one woman with the exact same strengths.
Mm.
But it is really insightful, isn't it, to have some of this self-awareness. And we talk a lot in the program about building your confidence comes from also knowing your strengths and seeing how they play out. So I love how hearing that in your sales role, it wasn't exactly how you thought, but when you looked at your strengths, you realized why that was at play.
Mm.
How have you used that awareness and knowledge with other leaders to support them in their development and growth?
Well, I mean, the work that I do, so I've been doing mentoring both internal at Western and with people external for a fair period of time now. And uh, so my approach is to there's actually 5 diagnostic assessments that I really encourage people to do because I think they're the best out there in terms of helping understand that frame. So there's the Clifton Strengths Finder, which I think really gets into the head
Yeah.
space, those patterns of thinking, feeling, behavior in terms of how you see the world. You're probably familiar with the work of Martin Seligman, grandfather of positive psychology. He created an assessment called the VIA character strengths,
I
which
think that's one I haven't done because I'm a
oh, okay.
diagnostic junkie. I have not done that.
Okay. Well, viacharacter.org.
Right.
He's uh and that looks at they did a lot of work, and if you want to read the magnum opus, it's many hundreds of pages, but they did a lot of research and distilled down classic virtues, and and distill them into character strengths, and that's really where you come from the heart. So
Right.
Clifton Strengths had VIA heart. Marcus Buckingham's standout
Yes.
is what I call the hand, because
Yeah.
Clifton Strengths Finder and VIA are self-assessment, whereas standout is what's called a situational judgment tool. So it will give you scenarios and say, here's a scenario, and give you 4 options and say which of these are you most likely to do
Right.
in this situation. And it looks at a couple of strengths roles and combines them and says that A plus B equals C. Then Gallup also has the Builder Profile 10, if you are familiar with that one, which
Yeah.
is really the me piece in terms of if you're, and it's really good for entrepreneurs in terms of identifying if you're going to build something or create something, how do you go about doing it?
Right.
Uh, and then the last one, which is the we piece, is the impact assessment, MPACT, which is you in a team-based environment, and identifying how you function in a team-based environment around the different categories of behaviour that drive team performance. So ideally, I like to get people over a period of time to do all of those,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, and we then look at crafting out of that uh, a purpose statement for them as an individual, that take because those five give you these data points which give you insight into the truth about you, and uh, and then if you're able to craft a statement of purpose in terms of who you are, that creates a really, really good foundation around which you can then begin to say, well, if this is who I am and this is why I do what I do, uh, when it comes to the what, which is where we live our working lives in terms of what you're asked to do, uh, the how you do it comes out of the who and the why, and that makes the what something that's far more uh, able to be delivered on in a way that's aligned with who you are, as opposed to just performing functional tasks.
Yeah, right. And then we're more likely, aren't we, in our leadership journey to feel that sense of congruence because we're genuinely building something around who we are. I'm not familiar with the impact one either. So there's two new assessments, mind blown, that I can go away and look at. I'm a bit of a fan myself of the LSI as well, from that looking at your leadership perspective and whether you're tendency is to be more passive or a bit more competitive, aggressive, and then how to build into more of a blue style, which is what I would call the servant eldership piece, that real how do you support others to grow and how do you build your career around your strengths in that way. So I love that context that you've given as far as helping people come up with that. And I think when we think about our First Nations people and a lot of Indigenous tribes globally, in a way, in a tribe, the elders would look and see what your strengths were as you were growing up, and then they would assign you a role almost in the tribe that was built around your strengths. And quite often in the Western world, I think we miss that piece a bit. Like sometimes, like you said, music was an interest to you. You started to look at a career down there, but quite often people just follow a career path because that's what my dad did, or because that's what I got into at university. And I think there's so many ways to come at our career and to think about, five people could be a lawyer, but be very different depending on their strengths and their character and how that all comes together. So I love that you've given this kind of holistic way of discovering that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important. And look, I mean, all to me, the thing with the assessments is that number one, they need to be scientifically validated, and that's really, while DISC and MBTI were interesting,
Yes.
they didn't have that scientific validation behind them, which said it had been through a degree of rigor, and had been through an analysis which said, yeah, this holds up from a science standpoint.
Yeah. Which is
So
why
that
I like the LSI as well, because it has so much rigor and so much data behind it and is the amalgamation of a lot. So I'm really happy that you've given us some recommendations. And I think in all the workshops I've ever run with leaders and the coaching I've done one-on-one with people, there is something really insightful about learning more about yourself. We tend to naturally have a hunger to go, oh, I want to learn more. And then it's, what do we do with it? Like it helps build some of our awareness and our emotional intelligence, but then what do we do with it? What have you seen people do with it once they have a bit of this purpose statement?
Oh, well, I think it just unlocks a tremendous amount of energy, because and this links into Buckingham's love piece, in that if you know the who and the why, and you've got this statement that also identifies the where and the when in terms of where you're likely to show up and when you're likely to give your best. You can bring yourself more fully to the what and the how. And so what I really encourage people to do is when they're getting started is to do a very simple exercise called loved hated because with love we know when we love something because we're excited about it, we're looking forward to it, we're energized by it when we're doing it, we're we're engaged, we lose track of time, and when it's finished, we might feel a little tired, but go, that was great. I
Yeah.
can't wait to do that again.
In flow as
Yeah, flow, yeah, in terms of that
yeah.
engagement piece, yeah. And hated it is the exact opposite, where you dread it, you procrastinate, when you're doing it, if you're a battery, you feel like your energy's draining away very, very rapidly. And when you're done with it, you go, oh, that was just terrible. I hope I never have to do that again.
Yes.
Now, all the research shows, and this comes out of the Mayo Clinic, is that if you can do something that you love every day, and get 20, and this metric of 20% of your time, doing activities that you love, that's the delta where you will experience more engagement, more creativity, more resilience, more productivity, more innovation. And I like that number because it's realistic, because you will always be asked to be doing activities at work which don't play to your strengths. Like it's unrealistic to say that I'm going to do everything that I love all the time. I'm just going to do love. No,
Absolutely.
life doesn't work like that. No.
No.
So what I encourage people to do as they start this journey is to just create a document which they can either keep it in a journal or they can create a Word document, have it permanently on their desktop with just 2 columns, loved it, hated it. And anytime they catch themselves doing something that they love, and the more specific the activity, the better, write it down. Write down date, time, and what the activity was. Same thing with hated it. And then at the end of every week, when you're planning for the coming week, pull up that document and have a look at it and start to begin to identify those activities. And the more you do this over time, patterns will emerge and you'll begin to see that there will be distinct things that play to your strengths because anything, a strength, while Gallup gives you the language around patterns of thinking, feeling, and behavior and tools and themes of talent, those aren't actually the activities. The what you do, the very specific activities of what you do, are the things that strengthen or weaken you. And a strength is any activity that strengthens you, and a weakness is any activity that weakens you.
You're singing from our song sheet. We actually have an activity in the curriculum that is a love and loathe. And I know for myself with that Mayo Clinic research, I was working with a leader one day and he said, so basically I only have to like my job one day out of the 5 in the week. But what I've found is even if I had one day in my week where I got to do stuff I love, it's not enough. And I found I actually need to have something every day that I love, you know, the 20%. So even if I've had a challenging day, one of the things I love is getting out and planting a tree or doing something in my garden. So I know even if I've had a crappy day, come 4 o'clock or something, if I go out in the garden for an hour, it ends up being a great day.
Yes, yeah. And this is where when you blend this love and work stuff with Gallup's well-being work, your people may be familiar with Gallup's 5 elements of well-being because the Gallup well-being work's been around for a few decades now. And they talk about the 5 areas of well-being, which are physical, you have enough energy to get things done; social, you have meaningful relationships in your life; community, you like where you live; financial, you manage your money well; and career, which is you like what you do every day. Now, Gallup published a book 2 years ago called Wellbeing at Work, which was their 21st century upgrade on well-being, because what all their research identified was that career well-being is actually the most important of the five. Um,
Mm,
uh, and Buckingham, and they say you like, but Buckingham, and this is where the love piece comes in. Buckingham says you do something you love every day, and work. His definition is really, really important with Buckingham.
mm,
Work is anything you do that creates value for somebody else. So it's not necessarily what you're paid to do,
mm.
as in if you have a full-time job. It can be a hobby, it can be volunteering, it can be, in your case, gardening. Yeah. Uh, so you can begin to develop this game plan, which is okay. I can look at tomorrow and say, hmm, Buckingham calls these moments of love red threads. I can look at tomorrow and say, in my work that I'm paid to do, I'm not seeing that I'm not going to get a red thread out of that most likely tomorrow. No. What can I do that I love on that day that's actually going to be a red thread? Um, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say doing this is one of my red threads.
Mm,
Interviewing people, talking leadership with people. So if I get a couple of these in a week, I'm, very, very happy. I love that Gallup is looking at well-being as well, and I think it's really timely because the Australian government now is also, and my colleagues and I have been in discussion with Australian Treasury because in the past, Australia as a nation has only ever measured our GDP.
mm,
And they've now brought in a new thing called Measuring What Matters,
mm,
which is specifically going to start measuring the well-being of Australians because they see how imperative that is, that you can't
mm,
just measure a country on its finances
mm,
without also going and how well and happy and whole are the people. And I think all of the research of the blue zones point to the same thing. And it's interesting what you're saying, that Gallup say career is, the most important of those five. Because in the blue zone, same thing. It's probably very similar where it's physical, social, community, but they say purpose. And quite often that's through career or some kind of work.
mm,
Having a purpose in life,
mm,
ikigai, is one of the most important things for
mm,
people to live long and happy,
mm,
that they feel like I've got a reason and a purpose to get up. And I think we're experiencing challenging times post COVID in the
mm,
world where lots of people have changed careers or have gone, oh, is this actually what I want to do now?
mm,
Does it fulfill me? What's
mm.
your thoughts on where we're at, and what you're seeing?
Look, I mean, it's just, I think post the two lockdowns, that caused a massive disruption where people really began to reflect and think through, um, is this really what I want to be doing for the future? So we've seen a huge increase in people rebalancing their lives. Because the other piece about that well-being is that the career in terms of doing something that you love every day, uh, and it's, I mean, that definition of career of Buckingham's being staggering about aimlessly. I like
Yeah.
to think of people having a vocation, and
Mm.
vocation from the Latin vocare, which means to call. So you have a sense of call to uh, to purpose. Uh, because if you can have career well-being, but if you're not thriving in the other elements in terms of physical, social, community, and financial, you'll burn out. Um,
Yeah.
and I've been there,
Mm.
um, where I found my work very, very fulfilling and energizing, but I've been out of balance. So I think people are, and it's great. It's great that Treasury is looking at this. I mean, my main concern for governments is that they'll come up with these very complicated metrics that are very, very difficult uh, to measure and do anything meaningful with. Whereas, um, yeah, as people are um, beginning to wrestle with this and say, where do I see my future? Gallup has actually created an index
Mm.
which they haven't pushed hard out into the marketplace, but I know they're increasingly collecting data on,
Mm.
which they call the Global Net Thriving Index, the GNT, which they say is their legacy piece, that they think should sit aside the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the ESGs, around if you and how you measure it is that for you as an individual, picture a ladder with 10 rungs, going up. Rungs from the ground, rungs 1 to 4 mean you're surviving, rungs 5 to 7 that you're struggling, and rungs 8 to 10 that you're thriving. And to ask yourself on a scale of on a ladder of 1 to 10, where am I right now? And where do I see myself in 5 years? And the gap between the two is what you need to focus on, improving and growing into.
Which is so fascinating because I'm involved in an initiative called Thrive Stars at the moment, and we are actually looking at developing an index as well for organizations as opposed to individuals to measure how well they're thriving. And one of our 5 key metrics is well-being as well. For that same reason, Gallup is looking at that. I would love to not just gloss over the perspective around burnout as well, because I know I've been through that, where I would have told you I was fine and that I loved my career, but my health was, and relationships really were progressively declining because all of my juice was going into my work. What do you think are some of the lessons that you learnt out of that aspect of having some burnout that other leaders could consider and take on board that are watching this? Because I think we talk a lot about building healthy, happy teams and psychological safety and all of that, but without a leader being healthy and well holistically themselves, it's very challenging to lead well. So what are some of the lessons you got out of that time in your career and life?
Yeah, I mean, I think the single biggest lesson I found is that, which is something I try and double down on as much as I can, is really being on high alert to monitor that love balance. Because if you're not doing something you love every day, if you're not experiencing that 20% delta, as the minimum effective dose, what as Tim Ferriss calls it, then you will start fraying at the edges. Those threads will start fraying, and you'll start coming apart. And I guess to not neglect those other 4 elements, because for me, I know certainly with my own mental health and well-being journey, the physical side of things is something I really have to focus on, and Gallup's well-being assessment scores you across each of them. So I think you need to be being holistic in your approach and saying, okay, where are my relationships at with people outside of work? One of Gallup's engagement things in their Q12 assessment is I have a best friend at work. So
Yes.
you actually have someone who you consider a close friend at work. If not, what is the status of your close friendships? Are you happy with where you're living? Yeah, because it all adds up. And yeah, so I think for me, when I've been through that burnout, it has really been that combination of a lack of love and one of the other elements being out of whack.
Yeah, I hear you. And I know lots of organizations I work with leaders in use the Q12, and lots of them, people often question, I don't like that question about having a best friend at work, but I know that Gallup's research shows that it really matters. And I think it's just categorizing best friend, where some people go, well, best friend to me is my best man or someone who's been a lifelong friend. But it really is more that concept of, is there someone that I completely trust? And is there someone who I could use as a sounding board and who I have their back and they have mine at work? So I know the wording can be challenging for people, that it is super important. And when we look at the Blue Zones research, they demonstrate how strong these communities that live to be well over 100 and all very happy and healthy have really close social ties and really close relationships that they have for generations, and that they have, you know, throughout their whole life. So lots to digest there, and lots for leaders to be thinking about. Throughout all of this career path, what then is your 20%? Tell me, what is it that you go, when I get some of that in my day, it lights me up?
So where I thrive is, what I kind of realize about myself is that I'm a startup lover, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm an entrepreneur starting up a business, but I love being in on the ground floor of something new and exciting. So if a new initiative is starting at my workplace, if there's a new project team that's being formed to do something, and I see that I can make a contribution, I love being on the ground floor, and I have this hardwiring that allows me to identify, in starting something up, who are the right people to actually have to be part of the team to actually get it through that startup stage. So when I've got the opportunity to be in on the ground floor, and help pick the team who are going to be on the park, and kickstart the whole thing and get it rolling. Once it gets beyond that, and it's got a proof of concept, and it's got the legs to be up and running, I don't need to be involved anymore. But yeah, so I'm always on the lookout for the opportunity to identify, to be part of the new thing. Yeah, and in my Clifton Strengths Finder, 6 of the 7 strategic thinking themes are in my top 10, and I have learner and input in my top 5. So I constantly need exposure to thought leadership and cutting edge thinking and new and innovative ideas, and I love being able to look at a whole range of different content and be able to say, well, when faced with a situation, to be able to use my inputs to be able to share relevant content with people in the right way that gives them something that's going to help them in terms of making a better decision.
No wonder we are kindred spirits, because my top 5, 4 of them are all in the strategic space as well, and I have input, learner, and connectiveness all up there in my top 3 as well. So no wonder we have some similar ideas and things that I guess we're passionate about. And I'm similar in that the execution ones are much lower down in mine. So I would be very similar. And I never, probably in my career when I worked for government, never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, but everyone used to call me the fire starter. I was the one that, you know, put the twigs down and lit the spark and then ran away and let everyone else. As soon as it gets to measuring, monitoring, and, you know, business as usual, I'm like, oh, I'm out of there, you know, boring. And I think that's the value, isn't it, of these assessments and knowing yourself, because then it's knowing, actually, I'm not at my best and I'm not doing my love work when I'm in maintenance mode for a team or a project, that actually my performance dips then because I lose interest very quickly. And so it helps you really think about how to shape your career path. And even if you stay in the one organization, what are the opportunities or the projects or the things that I can go and help start? And if it's even not in your career, as you were saying, where else can I get that in my life? And I know I've started networking groups and different things before where if I haven't had enough in my day job, I've created it somewhere else in my life. And I think it's that awareness, isn't it?
Yeah. And look, and the leading organisations recognise this, because, and this again was Buckingham's research in 9 Lies About Work, which says the most engaged employees have a side hustle. And so you probably know a good number of years ago, Google set this metric in place where they wanted to be giving their staff 20% of their time to be working on building something. and something they were particularly passionate about, and that's where Google Maps came from, which was an
Yeah.
Australian innovation. So they actually have deliberately created a cultural practice that says we want you to be doing love 20% of your time, which is pretty mind-blowing back before we even had a language around it. Uh, so
And it's
so yeah.
fascinating, right? Because Google stays up there as a great place to work.
Mm,
Because they're applying a lot of this research and thinking about it, aren't they? And creating a workplace that allows for that. It just makes me think of workplaces that are still back in, this is your job description, these are your hours, and you must just show up and do this. And the reality is humans aren't robots, and we don't like that.
Yeah, and I mean there's a huge challenge that organizations have to face, is that if they're not creating environments where they're actively if the position description doesn't play to people's strengths and they're not able to bring love to the position description, then you're going to lose them. It's just inevitable. So how do managers and leaders actually have the kind of conversations with their teams and their team members and their direct reports that get them on the path to discovering that 20%, and unpacking that, and this is where uh, um, and this is a blend of Buckingham and Hyatt, where one of the 9 lies about work is that people need feedback, and they actually don't, because feedback is fundamentally flawed because of the idiosyncratic rater effect. We're not reliable raters of other people. We can rate our own experience. People actually need attention, and they need a very specific kind of attention. So if there's one big thing that I really push anyone who's a manager to institute, is to have a weekly 15 to 25-minute check-in with every one of their team members. Because the performance review process, the annual performance review process, I think is should be killed. um, and you need to be having these regular weekly check-ins where you're basically asking your direct report or your team member 6 questions. And the 6 questions around what are you working on this week? So by the end of this weekly cycle, what do you want to have completed? You then ask them, where do you need my help? And ideally, you're doing this through a framework where it's a form of stewardship delegation, where they're empowered to actually come to you with recommendations rather than just present you with problems. Then you want to be asking them if there's any kind of project that they're working on, which could be their side hustle, or a piece of work that they're doing that's due in the next 90 days that they're responsible for. To ask them how you're tracking with that piece of work, because that's longer than a week. Then you ask them, oh, could you help me with? And you've ideally identified an activity that plays to their strengths that you can invite them to be part of. And then the last 2 important ones are, what did you love doing last week and what did you hate doing last week?
Yeah.
But you've got to have this education piece around the love and the hate, because people until people hear what a love and what a hate is, and until people understand that it's pragmatic and realistic and we're not living in a fantasy land, they just misunderstand the whole point of that part of the conversation. Because the goal is week by week, you get this 1% better each week at identifying what your team members, how they're uniquely hardwired and put together. What are the activities, the specific activities where they come alive and they experience that love, and how can I tweak what they do week on week so that love number is increasing.
You're absolutely singing from the song sheet what we talk about in Manager to Leader Shift. And I think everyone who's listening, go and check out the module around the 20-minute check-in, which is very, very similar. And we actually asked the love and loathe as one of the questions in that. But similarly, we talk a lot about frequency outpulls content. And it's exactly why I would agree with you. There's no need for that performance review once a year, that the frequency is more important. And that's what lots of the different research shows, isn't it? That we don't want to be driving down the freeway and wait till we get to a big green sign to tell us we got to the whole wrong city. We want lots of those little white lines along the way, which are course correction and do you need some support? Do you need to stop for fuel? Like that's what we need along the way. And so we talk about frequency outpulls content. It's not about having a 4-hour meeting once every 2 months. It's about having 10 minutes a week or a daily huddle or some kind of check-in that is that more frequent and helping people see that alignment. And I think that's more that coach approach that leaders are needing to have these days, where just like a swim coach, they're walking along beside the pool, giving feedback along the way, giving support, or attention, as you're saying, Marcus Buckingham calls it. And I have seen some of his videos where he's against the feedback, and I think we don't yet have a good language for what else could that be. But I love the concept of attention. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's I think it's shifting within organizations towards this. I think people, I wrote an article for a HR recruitment firm 17 years ago, around, or even longer than that. Yeah, that back proving then that 360-degree feedback was fundamentally flawed. And yet there are still organizations who do it. And it's an industrial mindset that because I can't rate you.
Yeah.
All I can talk about is how I experience you. And if somebody's doing something that you don't that you want to give feedback on, rather than doing the conventional, when you did this, I felt this way, because it's being inquisitive and appreciative in your inquiry and saying, oh, when you did that, I didn't quite understand why. Can you help me understand what was going on for you?
Yeah. Hitting on all the things, appreciative inquiry, all of the things. And I think in our modern world today, where people are scrolling and where there's all of these competing demands, we are actually in an attention deficit. And probably one of our most valuable things that we have, aside from our time, is exactly that, is our attention. So as leaders and managers, I continually say that our staff spell love the same way our children do, and that's TIME. So especially if you're managing a remote workforce and people working from home now, and you're not in the office as much, where you used to be able to just stop by someone's desk or see them in the corridor and chat, we have to make sure as managers or leaders that we're making that effort to give that attention, because that's where the gold is, isn't it? We can't be giving that attention without actually interacting.
Yeah. And that's why the check-in is so important, because frequency trumps everything.
Absolutely.
Because then by the time you actually get to any kind of annual review, there are no surprises, because you're completely up to speed with what's going on, and you've already reached agreement around 95% of the things that would actually form part of that kind of review process.
Exactly. And I often say even the Q12 and some of the staff opinion surveys and the Great Place to Work surveys, and that can be flawed in a similar way, because they're often once a year or once every 2 years. Managers and leaders should know exactly how their team is traveling at any one time, and not just wait for that. It's like living with a child and only once a year texting them and saying, how am I going as your parent? What do you think? It should be a series of dinner table conversations, sitting next to them on their bed, chatting to them. It's all of that. So
well, I mean, Gallup says 90 days. You should do you should do the Q12 every 90 days. And Buckingham created an engagement pulse when he had his own company, the Marcus Buckingham Company, which was uniquely team focused. And again, take a pulse every 90 days. I mean, organizations who do an engagement survey once every 12 months, it's just not, it's not a good use of anyone's time,
Yeah,
because it's retrograde, it's backwards looking, it's not present or future focused. The data's not real time.
that's right.
Uh,
And I've been working with some organizations lately who do use the Q12. And really interestingly, they were seeing that some teams' data was not great.
mm,
Then when they were going out and observing toolbox talks and them in their workshops and that, they were like, these guys are all engaged. They're really engaged. Like, why? And it was just the way some of the people were answering and when
mm,
they answered and all of that. But because it had been such a lag 9 months ago,
mm,
lots of work had been done by the leaders. And when they went out and actually saw it, and it was actually the CEO went there and he was like, wow, these people are totally engaged and they're asking questions and they're involved in their work. So we have to be mindful of that as leaders. And of course, we might be working for an organization where that they only use lag indicators. That's
mm.
fine. What can you do as a leader with your team to be in the moment and knowing exactly what's happening in the now? I think that's the message, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's what the check-in helps address. Mm,
Absolutely.
mm.
So let's we've come full circle from the beginning where your career, started out and not quite where you went, and then you went here and went there and got headhunted for all sorts of things. What would you say over all that span of career have been maybe the top 2 or 3 lessons that you're like, these are definitely the lessons that have stood me in my career? What do you think have been your main lessons?
Ooh, I mean, I think probably the couple of biggest ones was it's just really important to know yourself. Don't shortchange investing in things that are going to improve your own self-awareness.
Mhm.
Uh, and I would also say, um, as part of that process, ensure you have a really good network of support. I mean, I think everyone should uh, have at least one coach or mentor who they check in with on a regular basis, uh, who they can go to as a sounding board, and who can provide them with good independent reflections on what's
Mhm.
going on for them. So I think that 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 who piece I think is really important. And then I think the other one that I've probably come to learn and believe strongly with deep conviction when it comes to what you do with work is that uh, the what always trumps the how. In that, when you're evaluating something like a potential job role uh, or you're designing work for somebody, think carefully about what is the exact activity that they will be doing. And as a leader or a manager, who has the opportunity to delegate work to people, if you know who your people are, and you know what the work is that the team needs to actually be doing, then you are in a much stronger position to be able to design the work as much as possible around people's strengths so that what they do plays to their love. Uh, and that will ensure that you get a much more high performing team.
Yeah. Amazing. Great takeaways. And play to love, is the way to go, isn't it? Play to your strength. And I think lots of Gallup's research shows that you get 30% more productivity naturally out of people when they're playing to their strengths. It's where we want to go. And yet, all too often, we can forget that. So, as a manager who wants to become a great leader that people want to follow, I think all of the leaders I've ever loved working for was because they saw my potential, they played to my strengths, and they gave me opportunities to actually do that.
Yeah, yeah. But I
Rings
think it's
true.
really important if people, I mean, we talk a lot about and the debate's been going on for a long, long time about the difference between a manager and a leader. And I think one of the things we need to really grab hold of very, very strongly, and this fits into your servant eldership piece, is that leadership as it's understood in the Western industrialized culture as a concept has only existed for around 200 years.
Mm.
And we've created this whole industry around leadership. Whereas leadership is not a thing, it's not an industry, it's not a set of concepts. It's very simple. A leader has followers.
Mm.
Uh, and um, and the other lie that we need to really work very hard at killing is that we want people to be well-rounded. People aren't well-rounded. People are spiky. If you know uniquely who you are, there are things that you do and how you operate that are unique to you, that are your signature, and those are spikes. And people follow the spikes. Like I mean, I've seen this in my in working internally at Western with our simple things like our online internal social network on Viva
Mhm.
Engage, as it is now. No, it
Yeah.
used to be Microsoft Yammer.
Yeah.
Like my input strength, whenever I come across really, really good research or things that I think will be of benefit, I share them on there, and I've
Mm.
seen my followers grow
Yeah.
on that platform, and people look and seeing people who are looking at them, people who have, when I've shared something else, said thank you so much for loving everything that you're sharing. Yeah, it's the same way I operate on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and that's a spike of mine. And I know that if I'm true to the spike, then people will they will naturally attract the people who should be following me. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And
Mm.
I say something similar where I say people are like stars,
Mm.
and it's the pointy bits that they have that matter.
Mm.
And as a leader, it's important to have a well-rounded team,
Mm.
but allow the individuals in it to be a star, to
Mm.
have their pointy, spiky bits. You're right. Don't try and mold people into well-rounded. Build a team that has diversity. But in the individual, let them be a superstar at what they're great at.
Mm.
Awesome advice to wrap up. To finish off, I just want to say to everyone watching the recording later and everyone in the curriculum, I think everything, Nathanael, you've said has hit on nearly all of our curriculum. So thank you. Well done to you. That just shows, we're on a similar wavelength or path here. For everyone who is listening, don't just watch and then hang up and go back about your day. Stop and write down a couple of points, particularly around, was there anything new that I learned today? I know for me, there's a couple of new profiling tools I'm going to go and check out. What did I learn today? And then what am I going to make that mean for me? What am I going to do with it? So we're very big on action here. There's loads of inspiration, but I want you to actually have some practical takeaways. So really think about, what are one or two things that I could implement, try, track, do in my own leadership journey now as a result of the great sharing today from Nathanael. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a delight and a pleasure.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I look forward to us continuing to cross paths on LinkedIn. I will pop your LinkedIn bio in our course for people to be able to follow you if they want more of those tidbits that come from your learner. And look forward to continuing to elevate, I guess, the water level for all of us by everyone practicing what makes them great and learning to play to their strengths. Thanks again, everyone.